Good afternoon, gardeners. Morgan here from 3000 Acres, coming to you live from Reservoir as part of hashtag Darebin Backyard Harvest. Don't forget to share all of your gardening adventures using that hashtag, and you can still go in the running to win a copy of David Holmgren's Retro Suburbia. So today, in honor of World Bee Day, which is tomorrow, I am talking about the humble honeybee, which you can see behind me here in some very long grass in desperate need of a cut, which I will have to do in the dead of night to not disturb these beautiful little angels that are back there making some honey for me. So I have been a backyard beekeeper for a few years now and have both a hive at my urban home as well as a few other hives at my mother's peri-urban home out in Warrandyte along the Yarra River. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to keep backyard bees in urban areas, some of the tips and tricks and challenges, because I think one of the things that's missing in bee education is basically the 101 that teaches people of whether or not they want to give this a red hot crack or if maybe bees aren't the right choice for them. So there's one thing that I want to get straight right off the bat, and this is something I hear a lot of confusion about. The bees that you see behind me here in this hive are European honeybees. They are not native to Australia. They were introduced here quite some time ago and have become an integral part of our food system. They are fantastic pollinators, and they're a big part of how we produce food at the scale that we do in order to put them on our dinner plates. That's not to say they're the only bees out there. We have a huge number of native Australian bees that have been here long before humans and are also great pollinators, but live really different social lives than these European honeybees that you see behind me. So these guys here are not native. They are an introduced species, but as I said before, they've become a big part of our kind of agricultural system, and increasingly a lot of people keep them near their homes, mainly because people want to have their own honey and the other byproducts that you get from bees, but also because they've heard that global bee populations are in trouble and are really, really important to our survival as humans. So I've gotten that one out of the way. But there's another question that I always get asked when I talk about bees, and that's people saying, hang on a second, but I heard I could keep native Australian bees and that they would give me something like honey and not sting me. So let's clear up this confusion. These guys behind me here usually produce about 20 kilos of honey a year that I'm able to harvest. So that's how I'm able to get honey onto my dinner plate and give it away as great Christmas gifts, which I think is fantastic. The bees you might be thinking of are producing a substance called sugar bag. These are native stingless bees, but unfortunately it's too cold here in Melbourne. If you're going to have honey producing bees in your home, if you're going to have a hive, they are stinging European honeybees. Doesn't mean you're going to get stung all the time. I've only been stung a handful of times in years of beekeeping. But if you are someone who is desperately afraid of getting stung, keeping bees isn't for you. So with those pieces of clarification out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the European honeybee and why I'm so excited about them. So the main reasons people keep bees are, of course, for honey, which as I said, you can get many, many kilos of a year when you have an urban hive like this, as well as some of the other byproducts you can use. So for example, I've made wax candles or beeswax wraps from products I've gotten out of my hive. But the main reason I got into beekeeping was because I was concerned about the bees from a kind of ecological agricultural standpoint, but also because I'm a big food grower and I wanted better harvests. Bees are so essential to pollination. They have something called flower fidelity, which makes them go from one flower to the next that looks the same and help make sure that you get more zucchinis or more apples or whatever else is in bloom at the time, and are responsible for a great deal of the food that we eat. We need bees in order to survive. If you want evidence of that, there are some very damning videos online of what happens when there are so many herbicides that there are no bees, and you have to pay people to use a paintbrush to go from flower to flower. It has already happened in some places, and it's not a future I want to live in. So, big fan of the bees. So with all of that in mind, I've been a beekeeper, as I said, for some years now, and a big question I get asked is, but hang on, you live in an urban area. Before, these bees lived with me in Northcote, now they live with me in Reservoir. Both times in typical backyards with neighbors close on each sides. And I'm here to tell you, that is absolutely fine. Bees can thrive in urban areas. A lot of people have now seen that we have them on some rooftops around Melbourne. And in fact, what I find is that these bees have quite a lot to forage on year round. They have an easy time finding flowers all of the time because a lot of my neighbors are growing them. For my mom's bees who live in Warrandyte, there's less houses around and they're way more reliant on the eucalypts to bloom so that they can get a big harvest all at once. So don't let living in an urban area deter you from deciding to be a backyard beekeeper. They can absolutely thrive in that type of area. So some things to consider with your backyard bees are that they're going to need a place where they can be comfy and get some early morning sun. And for all of this and a whole bunch more information on backyard beekeeping, there's actually a really exciting video happening at 10 a.m. tomorrow on the Practical Beekeepers Facebook page. So thanks to Darebin Council, the Practical Beekeeper Benedict is going to be presenting a kind of extended 101 on tips and tricks to keeping bees, and be teaching you a little bit beyond what I'm going to be speaking about today. So make sure to tune in to his Facebook page at 10 a.m. tomorrow. That's the Practical Beekeeper, and he'll talk about all the things that you would need to get set up to be able to keep bees successfully. So the main things I wanted to cover is you need an appropriate site. You need to make sure that it's going to be okay with your neighbors, and that differs from council to council in terms of what you need to do and the restrictions that you need to follow. I find that with a little sweetening of the deal with some honey, neighbors are generally really pleased to have bees in the area, so I've never had an issue with it. Even when I was in rental accommodation and had to ask my landlord, he became my best honey customer, in fact. So you have to choose that location. There's a bit of a setup cost involved. That's everything from buying your suit to your hive to your beekeeping tools, and even the bees themselves if you're not going to catch a swarm. So that setup cost does differ depending on the type of hive that you get, but I would say at a minimum you're looking at a setup cost of about $500, which can sound like a lot, but when you think about all of the Christmas and birthday gifts that you're going to get out of that beehive, you pay it off pretty quickly. So I've got a hive behind me here that is relatively cheap and has worked really, really well for me over the years, but they can be quite fancy. A lot of people are familiar with the Flow hive, which is a more expensive and more designed kind of hive where you can hypothetically drain some honey out of chambers that break apart without getting into the hive. The big thing to keep in mind, and this is the first question I get, is sometimes people think that if they get a Flow hive, they never need to get in there and inspect. You absolutely do. You'll still need a suit and you'll still need to be checking on your bees. So keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that there will never be a difficult inspection or the need to get into your bees. So something that when people hear all of this that they always ask me about is, hang on, what can I do if I decided that I do want to become a beekeeper? So there's a few things that I would highly recommend from here, because here we're just talking about the 101, but what I want you to go out and get if you think that you want backyard bees is some hands-on experience. I was so nervous when I first got into beekeeping that I'd be shaking like this every time I lifted a frame out of the hive. Now I do it like it's nothing, but what was really helpful was having someone watch over my shoulder the first few times that I got into a beehive. There are classes you can do where you can do an inspection with someone there with you just to check that you feel really confident around the bees. And there are even programs called, for example, a Nuke Nanny program, where for the first few weeks of having your colony of bees, you can have them in a communal a communal area where there is an experienced beekeeper there to check everything with you and make sure everything's going really well. So what I would recommend before you get bees for yourself is do at least one class where you're opening up a beehive with an experienced beekeeper. That way you just get a feel for all of the tricky things of getting into a hive of pretty grumpy bees who you're disturbing at the moment. So check out a club where you're able to do that kind of training. There are some great books out there. The Australian Beekeeping Manual by Robert Owen is the Bible on beekeeping, but there's another great one by Doug Purdy called Backyard Bees. It's a little bit more basic, but a great taster of where you might want to go from here. If you've listened to this and you've said, oh my God, I'm gonna get stung, it's a big investment, this is not for me, there are still some things that I want you to do to be a supporter of the bees, particularly in celebration of World Bee Day. Even if you're not going to keep bees yourself, I have a few requests. One is that you purchase local honey. Not honey from the supermarket that makes it look like it's local with some fancy flowers on it. Actual local honey. Buy it from a beekeeper who you know in the area, or where you're able to see where the honey came from. There's a lot of places that sell local honey. It's becoming more and more popular. Look for something right from your area. There's even some kind of interesting research into whether or not that can have an effect for people who have some allergies to local pollen. So that could be an interesting one to test out. So other than buying local honey, I'm going to encourage you to plant a lot of bee-friendly plants. There's a great book called The Bee-Friendly Garden. And again, that one's by Doug Purdy, and it outlines what bees are looking for in a good flower. You're not only helping out your local beekeepers, but you are helping out the bees as well to make sure that they have forage year-round, which will keep them nice and happy. The other thing I want you to do is stay away from herbicides and pesticides and take every opportunity to not put poisons out into the world. So the thing that does go wrong with urban bees from time to time, and I will even notice this with my bees, is when someone's spraying a herbicide around here, for example, to kill their weeds, it has an effect on the bees. There's a number of things that can go wrong. It can kill them, it can make them very confused and make them not be able to find their way back to their hive, and it can weaken the hive. So consider very carefully before you're introducing any poisons into your garden and into the general area. Because when we spray a poison, keep in mind, it doesn't just kill the baddies, it affects the goodies as well. A classic example of that, separate from the bees, is putting out poisoned rat traps or mice traps. We do have owls around this area where I live in Darebin. I've seen a kind of a range of them at night. They catch those mice and they pick up that poison as well. It's really hard to control poison once it's out there, and that goes for bees as well. So limit herbicides and pesticides and any other poisons wherever you can to help out the bees. Another thing to keep in mind is that I would love, next time you see a swarm, which increasingly people are seeing in urban areas, a swarm being when a group of bees has left their hive and taken up a temporary roost, say, against a brick wall, in a tree. I've seen them in a number of interesting locations. And that's a collection of bees that are trying to find their new home, somewhere new and comfy to go to. If you were to see one of those hanging out, it's going to look like a big ball of bees. I even have a photo here with me. It's going to look like that. Don't call an exterminator. Call a beekeeper. There are lists online of beekeepers who come and collect those swarms, and they would much rather you call them than someone who's going to spray and kill the bees. In this past summer just gone, my mom and I picked up 3 beautiful swarms, which have all been rehomed and are nice and comfy in their new hives. So keep that in mind if you hear of anybody saying, oh gosh, I've got this swarm of bees, what am I going to do? Please call a beekeeper. They will be happy to help you out. So this has been a little taste of Beekeeping 101 and what you can do to support the bees, even if you're not going to get them for yourself. I would love if you have any questions about beekeeping, you can post them in the comments below. I will be answering throughout the week. I'm happy to address any more complicated questions, even if you're a beekeeper yourself and you want to ask me some more technical questions, feel free to post them in there and I will do my best to get back to you. So all of that said, don't forget to tune in tomorrow to the Practical Beekeepers Facebook page at 10 a.m. and he'll be doing a longer session on what to do to support the bees and how to keep bees for yourself. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.